underlying entertainment contract, a music contract, or a book contract, for example. If my clients had escalating royalties, for example, you don't need to call me. I don't want to call an agent. I don't want to have a reserve against money that should be paid immediately, even if it's a micro payment. I want to facilitate that autonomously, and that's the power of the code. And then to teach students actually how to build their own code, they have to speak in the language so that they can, again, really support the advancement of technology in this new wave, so that people aren't walking down the hall to legal after something is already formulated. So they're really excited about participating at that layer in order to really give full performance to a contract, for example.
Fun and goofy. So Amanda, let's start with you. I will say something I look forward to at every Ethereum conference is there's always going to be something interesting on the menu, like food. It'll be different places in the world, different food. But like if you go to I don't want to keep harping on IBM, poor guys, Microsoft, or you go to any other like tech conference, like you have the expectation of like, okay, this is how everyone's going to dress, and this is how everyone's going to eat, this is how everyone's going to behave. And I feel like every Ethereum event you go to, it's there's creativity. It's like a surprise about like, you know, how are people gonna what's gonna be on the menu and what's gonna be also on stage, and like what's gonna be the events. For you, when you go to an Ethereum conference, what are you looking forward to?
I guess I'm looking for brilliance. Like I want to hear what the next big thing is going to be. I don't assume that that's going to come from one particular company. I don't assume it's going to come from one particular person. Some of the people that I've been seeing lately cropping up on various, you know, DeFi Discord chats aren't the same people that I saw at DevCon, aren't the same people that I saw at ETH Denver. And so just like people come out of the woodworks that get into the Ethereum community that have been anonymous or pseudonymous, and then they take the stage and they really just come out with something amazing that you hadn't thought of before. I think if we were in the midst of conference culture right now, we would see people talking about, you know, yield farming, liquidity mining, but of course not leaking their alpha. But you would see, you know, you'd see people on the stage that haven't, you know, gotten stage time before, that don't have one of these like media built up presences and big names yet, and they would be coming up with the next big thing. So that's one part of the space that of the Ethereum community that always kind of surprises and delights me, is that the innovation can really come from anywhere, and then it's not only from one company or one group of people, and then combine that with the culture. And yeah, it's not like an IBM conference. It's a manifestation in person of internet culture. Like what we think of as Ethereum culture is internet culture. It's a very particular species of it, but it's definitely an outgrowth of it. And it's bringing that imagination to life. And so it's always fun from an aesthetic and experiential perspective to see how that's being done.
She's related to the herding cats and other aspects of internet culture that we can actually like live out in a very physical, tangible way. Tonya, what's something that you look forward to at Ethereum events?
So you stole my thunder a little bit, because as you were talking earlier, I was kicking myself. I was like, oh, I remember this one awesome time where, and to Amanda's point as well, demoing, and I'm sorry that I don't remember the name of the project, but demoing a new wallet where
the burner wallet. The burner.
There we go. That was amazing. Yes, that was amazing. And, you know, there were people standing in line. First of all, the food was amazing, but it's marrying, you know, the technology, what Amanda said about whatever the latest, greatest tool is, something that we may not have ordinarily interacted with, but it had immediate use because everybody was starving and it was an amazing day. So it's things like that where you can mix. It's fanciful in the sense that it's not uptight. I come from an uptight world. Lawyers are known for being uptight. So, you know, anything less than that is always a dream for me. But it's just such a wonderful departure to be able to engage in that way, that you have the best of, you know, I can think of meditation zones and singing and all of these things. I see like pillows one where it was like I was walking into this alternate universe that you couldn't even tell it on the outside until you went in. So it's literally embodying that magical spirit and the energy. And I think events like that capsulize it so well.
I think maybe either meditation or chill, like special spaces at different kinds of Ethereum spaces that were like specifically geared towards reconnecting either between people or with themselves, and I always found that to be really refreshing. I think one of them even had like a coach and a masseuse. That was San Francisco, Ethereal San Francisco 2017. I very much remember looking over and seeing someone get a massage and being like, huh, I would definitely like, I can see why people are like more relaxed and not like arguing about whatever PR has been done next. Do either of you guys have a favorite piece of Ethereum swag? Right?
I'm wearing my favorite one, although I'm not. I had last minute change of location, or I was really going to swag it out. So I'm not as swagalicious as I could have been with my background, but I love my T-shirts and anything that represents the fancifulness that you captured in your article, and certainly what I enjoy and experience. And certainly as a Black queer woman, I love a good rainbow. So that's always going to work for me.
Having also been responsible for producing or helping design some of the swag, I've been thinking about taking all the T-shirts and weaving them together into a quilt and having a big Ethereum quilt. But my favorite is actually just looking at the backs of all the T-shirts and watching. I think you can map the growth of the space and see which companies existed in 2016, which companies exist in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and you can learn a lot in that kind of macro longitudinal study of the space about which kinds of projects are succeeding, which kinds of teams are succeeding, almost than anything else in a way.
Like, I think that there are some projects that maybe became something else, and it's actually a good thing. That's a great thing. Like, it took in feedback and evolved. And then there are some projects that are kind of new and different interpretations of older things. Doesn't necessarily mean the older things failed. If you can think of an Ethereum project that succeeded for you, what was that? What's that example project, or what does that look like? Tonya, did you want to start?
It's hard to say because everything's moving at the speed of Ethereum. You see what I did right there? I'm trying to picture, as Amanda was speaking, that's a really good point when you think of either the backdrops or T-shirts or other things that existed. I'm trying to think of things that existed at one time. One thing that I fell in love with in terms of the fancifulness, but also the use case that was really working on something different, and it was CryptoKitties, which was the blessing and the curse when it started clogging up the network. But it was a really interesting opportunity for me to delve into NFTs and really see underneath the hood of what the point is to even try and focus on collectibles and create scarcity and all of the things that are very interesting for me as an intellectual property lawyer as well. So I know that it still exists, not in the capacity in which, they had that big boom going into 2017, leading into 2018. But that's something that stuck out to me because it was also a really great bridge for my understanding as I looked at it from the legal, the technical, and also the cultural implications.
And one of them from the legal perspective that Tonya was making me think of was open law, which is actually one that's been around a while. And Aaron Wright's just done a bang up job. And I think they've done a great job in going from their original instantiation, the Brooklyn project being so helpful in terms of understanding laws around tokens and ICOs, and now really graduating into the new world that we're in with DeFi and DAOs and launching the LAO, I think has been a really kind of impressive outgrowth of that project. A second thing we hear about DeFi all the time, but the DeFi platforms that we hear about every day are built using tools that existed in the ecosystem from the beginning. And usually you don't see like developer tools or infrastructure platforms getting the kind of publicity that the actual end user interface gets. But it's because things like Infura were built, things like Truffle were built, that are being used in order to architect those platforms, that we have those platforms. And so I see those things as a natural outgrowth of the work that went into the space from day one. And then, I think that DeFi is that natural outgrowth. I don't think it's the only outgrowth, but I mean, from like a cultural perspective, like DeFi is successful in that it's offering tech savvy people who may or may not have any money social mobility. It's we live in a world where at least we're told there aren't that many mechanisms for people who aren't coming from a lot to achieve mobility, and DeFi, it's at a small scale right now, but it actually is that for the tech savvy, and that's a pretty rare, awesome, weird thing to see developing out of our ecosystem. I mean, I think it's interesting. You get like there are two trends, right? Like one trend is what Mark Andreessen said years ago, which is that software is going to eat the world. And the second trend that we hear about all the time is the financialization of the economy. And so why wouldn't software eat the financialization of the economy, right? So why not build sophisticated financial products using tokenization, using the Ethereum blockchain, and come up with all kinds of bonkers tokens and ways of trading that befit the capabilities of the platform. And this is kind of the sorts of innovation and even spandrels of innovation that Ethereum was built for. I think that was like the original intention was, Bitcoin is really interesting and is a great potential store of value. And at the same time, if we're going to build an adjacent economic system, we need to offer the ability to architect more sophisticated financial products. And now we're seeing that vision actually coming to fruition. I mean, I think yield farming or liquidity mining is one example of that. And I think we're going to see a whole bunch of others. I think we're going to see trends cycle through in terms of, what has the best return.
And when I think about various projects developing in the ecosystem, that they're not developing in a vacuum, right? That they are connected to the larger community outside of our community within Ethereum. And that means if we're really serious about mass adoption, if we're really serious about moving forward, if we're really serious about serving the unbanked, underbanked around the world, and certainly in the United States. You don't have to go over a border in order to find some of those same ills that we seek to resolve from a DeFi perspective in Latin America, on the continent of Africa, in Southeast Asia, in countries that have destabilized political systems and certainly economies. That if that's the true tenet to really empower, to level the playing field, to increase liquidity across the board, then coming up with these type of financial products in the DeFi space are going to be a really important part of that. So that we always are wondering about onboarding and how to facilitate adoption. You have to meet people where they are when they have an urgent need and a pressing pain point. And so DeFi is really emerging from that to really give life to some of the ideas. I think back again to 2017, where there was so many people were complaining about what didn't already work. But it doesn't happen like that. You have an idea, you throw out ideas, and then you get to the refinement point. I think of Filecoin, things like that, where great idea that are just stepping into refinement. And we're seeing that in DeFi. We weren't talking about DeFi in 2017, but absolutely correct. All of the tools were there. This space is growing and meeting needs. And I see the bridge between centralized finance and decentralized finance as being some of the more robust protocols that facilitate yield farming, et cetera, et cetera. And things absolutely will come and go, but we start somewhere, we iterate, we tinker, we fail forward, we keep evolving, and that's the beauty of innovation.
I don't know if you saw it was actually an op-ed in CoinDesk. I think it came out today. It was Matt Luongo from the TBTC project, how millennials are shaping the future of money. And it points to some really interesting stats. And I've read a bunch of these stats, like that a third of millennials don't think that banks are going to be necessary, that, like a quarter of millennials own Bitcoin or plan to own Bitcoin. And so we're seeing this whole adjacent economic system emerge in a moment where people feel like the mainstream or legacy system perhaps isn't serving them or helping them achieve their goals. And so we're seeing, just like Tonya was saying, people with this urgent need, we want to, be able to participate in the economy. We want a seat at the table. You're seeing them turn to this alternate system in order to get that. And you're seeing that alternate system yield fruits. And so I think we're going to keep on seeing innovation there, especially from this generation and the one behind it.
Because Tonya, one of the things that I love about your perspective, in particular on the space, is because coming from a legal perspective, you understand that laws exist, and we can invent all of these different technologies, and that's super great. But the ways that people will be able to use them is entirely defined by their jurisdiction and what rights they have in that jurisdiction, if they're aware of their rights, even. So as we move towards a world in which more people take more financial responsibility for themselves and experiment with different kinds of tools that previously had only been operated by institutions, what do you think that people, if you had a magic wand, what would you want to see, whether that be resources for a coin center style think tank, or whether that's educational groups or lobbies or something? What helps people bridge that gap between the tool that exists and their legal rights and opportunities in order to access and use that tool safely?
Balance of law, in my humble estimation, is finding that sweet spot between the protection of consumers to the extent they need protection. And that's a whole other philosophical debate, right? About my money, my life. I don't want to be an accredited investor. If I want to blow it here or at a casino where I could lose an equal amount of money or worse, that's a debate for another. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? I could buy a pizza with some Bitcoin. I don't know, right? So it's my money. So, but the sweet spot is spurring innovation, supporting innovation in a way that doesn't cause injury. And from a legal perspective, it's some type of legal injury, obviously, to your person or to your finances, to your business, to your ability to compete. So we do live in this infrastructure, this larger infrastructure of the rule of law, but the rule of code can operate within that, again, as a technology, as a tool that actually is really challenging. I think we all know that, challenging the status quo. That we know that traditional and legacy financial institutions, for example, have known about this for a long time. They didn't have to move off of their spot because they weren't being forced to. So the same ones who said, drug money, dark web, nothing to see here, fringe crazies, go away, all of a sudden saying, but you can use my Visa credit card for, now we will accept, and PayPal and Cash App, and now I consider them legacy institutions. So look how far we've come, right? That are really starting to turn and really realize that the time has come. And so in the financial realm, in the healthcare realm, in other areas that are heavily regulated or have privacy issues and security issues, that the tools should be used to facilitate something that's better, faster, cheaper, but it won't be outside of the legal confines. So I think it's just a fool's errand to say, forget about it. I'm not going to think about that at the protocol level. But I say that gingerly because at the protocol layer and layer 2 and beyond, that you do have to have the space for innovation, but you have to be accountable and responsible for the area that you work in. That's challenged when we think about something that's quote unquote borderless, but geofencing does a lot to create not artificial, but other borders when we don't see physical ones. Right, absolutely.
Amanda, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but in my non-lawyer opinion, I think a lot of people in the space have been positively surprised to see a lot of the, we're talking about Ethereum from 2015, 2016, 2017 to today. I think people have been positively surprised to see how nuanced and granular a lot of the guidance that has come out has been. I know folks were worried that it might not be, that it might be just considered dark web money or, some other kind of 2012 hangover type of negative stereotypes about cryptocurrency that aren't necessarily accurate. So I think a lot of people were happy with the U.S. regulation that's come out. But I guess, from a macro perspective, if you look at the makeup of our lawmaking bodies, you get people with business degrees, you get people with law degrees. You don't get a lot of people with engineering or technical degrees, or even people that are necessarily super tech savvy, even if they don't have one of those degrees. We see, the average ages of our lawmakers increasing. So these people haven't necessarily spent as much time with technology or aren't as technology native. I mean, our leadership in the U.S., and I'm speaking from the U.S., which is why I have this slightly U.S. Focused perspective. Our leadership is much older than the leadership in China and other countries that are innovating really quickly in blockchain. And I mean, I probably can't get all fine-grained on the legal distinctions between things the way that Tonya can, but I know that from a macro perspective, it would probably behoove us in the space and in general in the U.S. to promote tech savviness among our lawmakers. And with voting is a good way to do that,
Absolutely, absolutely. Your point is really well made. I was thinking about some of the other countries, both in terms of the age of their leadership. I think of Bermuda, for example, when the Bermuda Premier Bert he's the classic example. More Premier Berts, please. And I also think of kind of the morass. I have great respect for it. I think it emerged for various reasons, but in the United States, there's so many. It's a morass, and trying to make sense not just from the SEC or CFTC, FinCEN, IRS, you name it. All the things are happening, right? Where you could be more nimble as a smaller nation as well that may have one to a few. Now, you start to get concerned about the centralization of power, but also with smaller countries that are tech and innovation focused, they see a great opportunity and they're able to move more quickly, more rapidly to try out some of the things, open up their proverbial and actual borders, and invite business to come and tinker in sandboxes and really to grow with them. So from that perspective, you're spot on that we really have to be more focused at every level of education on empowering men, women, non-binaries, all to focus on what the next step is. I talk to my students and anyone else who will listen that it's not about preparing for the jobs of today, but the careers of the future. And that means, I'm thinking of the Googles and the EYs and the IBMs and some of those other legacy institutions are doing a pivot to say, degree optional, nice if you have it, but not necessary. We're looking for skills. We're looking for credentials. We are looking for the new collar opportunity, the skilled professional. And so that means we have to double down at every level of education on technology. And that thinking from a very early age will give rise to some leadership in the future that will be more innovation minded. So we're not holding so jealously guarding the status quo that, means that you're not moving forward and then you're going to die out. Hashtag dinosaurs. I don't know what happened to them. They say it was a meteor. We don't really know. But if you want to make sure that we don't have dinosaurs in charge of innovation, then we have to get technology and future focused for sure.
Very, very global. And I'm curious to hear from you, Amanda. I know that you've been involved a little bit longer than me. How do you feel that Ethereum became so global? I mean, we know that it started generally in Toronto, and that people met also at a conference in Miami, that the first DevCon was in London. But now pretty much anywhere you go in the world, you can find an Ethereum community. At Consensus, when you were working on marketing, was there a very specific focus on growing those kinds of communities, and what was that like?
In terms of its structure and what it accomplishes in the world, it's by default a global movement. We saw a lot of value creation in the tech sector coming from Silicon Valley, and by virtue of just how Ethereum works, it's going to make that a more internet-driven phenomenon, and it's going to decentralize access to capital. It's going to decentralize value creation away from the places where it's traditionally been. So instead of imagining, if I live in Kathmandu that I'm going to have to somehow get myself to Silicon Valley in order to get my startup funded, in order to, hobnob with the right folks that are going to help me out. I can maybe use a decentralized mechanism for bootstrapping my own funding and my inclusion in the larger system. So we were seeing a huge amount of enthusiasm from all around the world for this technology, because not everyone can pack up and go to Silicon Valley and then get the right introductions and meet the right people. So, by virtue of how it's structured, it's taking capital formation from being really like an interpersonal networking kind of exercise to being a much more digital exercise. And so that automatically generated a lot of this kind of momentum. Then, there's always been a lot of cryptocurrency leadership, even pre-Ethereum from, you see like Mt. Gox in Japan, like a lot of the early, exchanges for Bitcoin were in Asia. There's naturally been a lot of enthusiasm for Bitcoin since the very beginning in China because of concerns about, government restriction on wealth movement there. That obviously continued. You get some of those markets that were early adopters, also early adopters of tokenization, and then you get some really small and nimble sovereign governments all around the world, from Dubai to Singapore, that are really able to leverage their sovereignty as an advantage in order to be more agile and to be faster, to create a hospitable environment for things like tokenization, for things like Ethereum development to thrive. And so those were some of the markets that it made the most sense to go into, because they got it and they could, act really quickly. And their people in those areas were immediately very enthusiastic. So it's always been very global. The community has always been spread out all around the world. But I think that was true before Ethereum.
The tech community in general is very, very global. We have a few questions from the audience, and I'm going to tweak them. Because, for example, one of the audience members asked, what's the second best blockchain culture? Bitcoin, Tron, EOS, etc. And for me, but I feel like, what is the best culture, right? That's a very difficult thing to define. So I'm going to let each of us answer it then separately or differently, whatever best means to you. What is a really good, a best culture, and maybe how does Ethereum compare to that? It could be that it's equal, that it shares this good quality, or it could be that it is still growing and needs to match that good quality. Tony, did you want to start?
Gosh.
Right, that's a hard one.
Because I was trying to think of my definition that will lead me to the answer. I think so. I'll speak more broadly about what an exciting community is for me, and that's one where you have the vibrant community obviously originates with devs, but expands beyond that, so that there's some type of bridge or connection between users and builders. And so when I think of users, I think of those who are protocol level developers, and I think of the applications that would serve, because that's the trifecta to me. And if there's not a strong connection, then you could have a robust dev community, but if no one's building on top of it, who cares? And you could have a lot of building, but if you don't have mass adoption, who cares? And so the one that hits, and that's why I really do think of Ethereum in that respect, but there are certainly other spaces. Obviously, BTC, OGs, I mean, that's a vibrant community for sure. And so I can't think of, but there are a lot of very zealous advocates for their platform, that's for sure. I mean, crypto Twitter says the story. That's what I should do. I'm going to go to Twitter and I'm going to scroll through crypto Twitter, and then I'll let you know who's yelling at who today.
Do we think that the Zcash community is an offshoot of Ethereum? Or do you think the Zcash community is an offshoot of Bitcoin? Because I feel like there's a lot of cultural similarities between the productive goofiness is how I'll describe it, of both Zcash and Ethereum. I don't know.
I guess I was planning to, in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, quote the anthropologist Wade Davis and saying other cultures are not failed versions of us; they're unique manifestations of the human spirit. And I would say, Ethereum culture has been a success. And for all of its goofiness, I think sometimes its goofiness as a culture is overemphasized in a way that actually kind of artificially detracts from the facts, which are that there, is nearly 36 billion in the Ethereum market cap. There's 3.6 billion in DeFi with 1 million in Maker alone, and that's in USD. Like, this is where the innovation is happening. This is where the top engineers and developers in the space are building. The top projects are being built on this platform. The most innovative thing, which I think is DeFi these days, is coming out of this platform. I find that pretty clear. And yet all these other communities have other value propositions. I understand. I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. I own some Bitcoins. I understand the Bitcoin value proposition. I'm certainly not someone who thinks there should only be one community and should only be one blockchain. So I love the fact that this plurality exists because it gives people the option. And yeah, I think people that are active in Ethereum or active in Bitcoin or active in both are also active in Zcash. I love Zcash. Zcash makes all the sense in the world to me. And I think one innovation that we're going to see is interoperability. I think we're going to see chains carve out their niches and compete on where they really have utility. And then as each of them carves out their niche, we're going to see interoperability between them, right? Like, we've seen this incredible race to bring the liquidity from Bitcoin into DeFi by allowing you to act on the Ethereum blockchain with your Bitcoin. And so we've seen projects like TBTC, we've seen things like, Ren, we've seen WBTC. And so obviously there's a lot of thinking going into that. I think you're going to see that with other chains too. And it's funny, I think the technology and the community kind of go hand in hand. And as we see the value flowing between these communities, we're going to also see some convergence. And so I'm excited to see that and hope everybody keeps their quirks and their unique manifestations too.
The fact that, as you say, a lot of times the personality in the Ethereum community is overemphasized in an attempt to detract from it. And we see that similarly with, for example, poets on Instagram, where people say like, oh, well, their work is very short and it's just memes, it's not art. Or you'll see that with artists on TikTok who develop an audience there. So I think we see
but those guys don't have 36 billion on chain,
As a company, and you're like, they have plenty of users, that's not really the issue. The issue is that that's a younger generation doing things in maybe a non-traditional way, and so that will attract that kind of criticism, regardless of like the very pragmatic business application that is happening on that platform. And I'm curious, so a lot of times when people criticize Ethereum, first off, they talk about the goofiness. That's definitely a thing. And the other thing they do is they want to talk about securities law. That is definitely a fixation. And I'm curious to hear from you, Tonya. Do you think that we can have mainstream or widespread Ethereum usage without needing to completely overhaul securities law? That do you think it already kind of accommodates for the different kinds of products? Or do you think that the U.S. needs to change its securities law, or it will hamper growth?
I think that there is some space in existing SEC regulations to allow for the issuance of tokens, but what we have right now would not have supported some of those astronomical raises off of ICOs. So there should likely be some type of innovation. I think they're going to meet, I think they've been moving slower than I thought they would, in a way that didn't put the whole entire kibosh on the entire ecosystem. And I think that's good. And, thank you, Commissioner Peirce, for holding down, the minority voice fort for the SEC. So I think it's a both and, not either or. There is space for raises, but again, they're just not going to be at that astronomical number that we saw 2017 going into 2018. And there was a lot of garbage out there. that did a disservice to the community. And it was too easy for people to write off, oh, scammer, 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 the whole thing is a scam, right? And so it's now when you had builders who stuck around to really keep working in the space. And now with, anytime you have price action, you have regular eyeballs looking, or anytime somebody gives the Bitcoin or ETH or something a shout out on CNBC, we're doing something right. Or last year, I had the good fortune to be at one of the hearings in the House Financial Services Committee when they were giving the once over to Facebook and roughing up Leigh Cuen. But that gave a great, I think we came out of that as certainly on the Bitcoin side and other tokens and coins, that if you have problems with that, a corporate coin, then you shouldn't have problems with this. We finally were able to distinguish between the two. And I think that helped Congress. I think that that helped regulators to see that there are distinctions that can be made. The Token Taxonomy Act keeps coming up. It has not been passed yet. But I think, to Amanda's point earlier, we have the age and stage of some legislators that were not inclined to consider this. But we're at a point now that the first version of the CARES Act had a digital dollar in it. That was taken out. But I think that we're going to start to hear about that more, because it's not a certain segment of the poor unfortunates. This is literally the entire world. This is everybody in America, everybody around the world who has been impacted by COVID-19, who wants their money yesterday so that they can pay their rent that's coming up in 4 days, right? So that has hastened, that has focused the attention, I believe, of regulators and of legislators, because now their constituents are actually talking about it too in a more sophisticated way. So I say all that to say, again, back to your point, there's going to be a both and push as regulators get more comfortable in what they should support and what they should not support, to the betterment of innovation and in further protection of consumers.
Yeah, I'm going to tweak it. So it asked about how the Ethereum culture is addressing some of the discrimination or inequality we see in society, whether that be related to gender, whether that be related to other kinds of community or identity. And I don't think that anyone is arguing that Ethereum can solve any of these things. Bitcoin solved that, Ethereum solved that, none of this solved it. But in terms of, I'm curious to hear if either of you have had an experience where you used an Ethereum product, or you saw someone using an Ethereum product that you felt like was a tool for them as they were attempting to address whatever that situation is. I can maybe offer an example, because I know that's a very vague and general question. So I experimented with Ethereum, trying to make an NFT with a poem, and it was really fun, and I really enjoyed that. And I know that to print a poetry book or to print a poem and distribute it to people is very expensive. There's a lot of gatekeeping in terms of the publishing industry, and I just wanted to be able to reach out to readers who liked the poem and do it very directly. And so without needing to go and get like a formal publisher involved, I was able to very easily access the tools to publish directly to the reader who was interested. And I'm not in any way saying that I'm like an oppressed person, but that's certainly a way that for me, I use this tool in a way that was more accessible to me than the traditional standard. And I'm curious to hear from you guys if you've seen a tool or Ethereum project that you felt also offered that kind of ease of access for people who maybe aren't already in the Citadel.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to one experience, or the experience that I had hosting Ethereal all the time, which isn't quite the same as a product, but it's kind of a manifestation of our community in a way, which was when we were planning the early Ethereals, we didn't necessarily put a bunch of time into, let's make sure there's a 50-50 gender balance of our speakers. Let's make sure there's, other kinds of diversity. We didn't do that, and yet we ended up with a program that looked that way. And we were called, one of the most diverse conferences in the blockchain space. And then surprise of surprises, we had something like 40% women purchasing tickets. And lots of women were showing up, and we didn't even mean to. And so I guess my challenge would be, you don't have to plan super hard and think about and explicitly, try to manufacture artificially diversity for one of these things, because they're actually, they're incredible, incredibly diverse, I guess is the only word for it, a group of people actually innovating in this space. And if you just try to pull together a group of some of the leaders, you're going to find yourself with that group fairly naturally without having to squeeze yourself into a box. So that's kind of the first thing that I would say in response to that question, because I wouldn't just go in assuming that the community looks like this or is like this until you've actually kind of poked around in it. In terms of Ethereum-based products, like I think Ethereum at the core is a diversity optimizer because it reduces interpersonal, networking necessary to do something, and makes it it makes it all digital. So if there, to the degree that there's discrimination in who gets access to capital, to the degree that there is a bias against people that aren't physically in Silicon Valley or people who don't look a certain way, you can use the tools of the Ethereum blockchain to be equal to everybody else who's using it. And that's kind of the promise of blockchain tech, is that it does treat everybody equally and there are no special rules for some people.
And a platform that is, I'm coming from it from a number of places. Let me take a step back. I would absolutely challenge the space to not just say, this is what a common thing I hear if I press someone to say, I'd love to speak at your event, but if I'm the only Black person or I'm the only woman, you better find somebody else, or good luck with that, because I'm over that. It's 2020 and I'm often still the first or only. Yeah. My mom was the first and only patent attorney where she was. My dad, who's a surgeon, had many a space where he's the first or only. He's the first Black president of the Maine Medical Association, for example. We're not talking 1900s and 1800s, right? We're really talking about now. So it's not enough for people to say, I'm not racist or sexist at this point, and particularly given the social injustice and the groundswell here in the States in particular, to be to be proactive. Not to say, I think of some other spaces, if I challenge someone, they say, well, it's open to everyone. Well, so is the internet, but some people don't even have access. So it's not enough and to Amanda's point, these are tools that can be used to empower the status quo or to reach beyond that. That is the promise of this technology, to reach beyond it. The capabilities of doing that are without question. Are we, those who are at the table, who are at the dev level, who are at the decentralized application level, on the user side, on the empowerment side, are we doing the work to ensure the promise is a reality? We have a better chance with this system than we do the existing infrastructure, but will this end up being a microcosm of tech and finance? In many ways, it looks like that now, but there is a promise, because look at this amazing panel right now. Look at this amazing kickoff that we are here having this conversation because we are completely crazy and in love with the technology in this space. And our existence means that it's possible, but it can't just be the three of us. And so that's what I really want to see. I love the I don't think is as the results that Amanda has experienced is as organic as she thinks, because you have a network that would allow that to happen, right? So there's a method to that. It organically happened because you've positioned yourself to be open without even calling it that. That's how you walk in the world. And so those are the people I want to step up to the fore and really make sure that the vision is a reality. So I don't have a list of 15, 20 or so that I could rattle off at this moment in time, but I'm insanely hopeful about the future.
Things together, and I pay you a compliment a little bit, Amanda, because I remember that conference very much. I remember thinking to myself that it looked like there were just so many different kinds of people, And I agree with Tonya that the way that probably happened for you guys naturally is that you had already gone into hiring intentionally. And when you're hiring intentionally, and when you're like, there were so many other things that you guys were doing very intentionally, then the organic result of that was having a conference that reflected that other effort. And I think that's really great. In order to wrap us up for today, we've all met a lot of interesting people in the space, I think. And Amanda, I know that you certainly have gone all over the world meeting people when it comes to different Ethereum events and conferences and programs. Did you meet, it was Deepak, the author? Is there a bigger celebrity? Who was the biggest celebrity that you met from Ethereum, and what was that experience like?
The biggest celebrity that I met from Ethereum. Oh, you know who I met? I met Akon. I met Akon at the World Economic Forum in 2018. Akon actually is extremely well versed in blockchain, very well versed in Ethereum. He came to a panel in our space, but he could have, and he sat on one of the panels and he was talking about his project to light Africa, but he could have sat on a technical panel. He was incredibly versed, very impressive. I'd been a fan of his music, but I hadn't really thought about like the rest of his life and his other interests. And so it was definitely, it was a bit of a starstruck experience for me. He's probably the biggest celebrity that I met. It's funny that Ethereum, got me to meet Akon, but I guess that's probably the number one. The Deepak story is pretty hilarious, which was I invited Deepak Chopra to come give a meditation at one of the early Ethereals, and the community just kind of went nuts arguing about whether whether that was appropriate or not. And the consensus was that it kind of wasn't, and we all called it the Deepacalypse. But it was a funny experience. Yeah, I mean, you meet all sorts of people when you're part of. And I was so lucky to have the opportunity to be part of this group that was helping to bring this really incredible technology to the world, and all kinds of people get very interested and want to hear about it, and want to hear about it firsthand, often from Joe. And so I've been very lucky to be part of this community.
Have as many fun apocalypse stories.
I know. Well, a person who I was somewhat starstruck in the sense that I talked about this person so much in class about the uses in entertainment for blockchain technology and smart contracts. So I was very bullish on Ujo music and look under the hood of all that. And so I received this award at the Enterprise Blockchain Alliance Awards in Toronto last year. And Imogen Heap was she was performing, and I was like, but I tried to be cool because I was an awardee too, so I had to, I couldn't completely wig out, but it was really cool to see someone who I talked about a lot and really appreciated how she and through Ujo music started leveraging the technology to bring to life something we talk about in class all the time. So that's my low key story.
And thank you to everybody at home. I hope that everyone is having as much fun as I've been having and as we've been having, reflecting on 5 years of Ethereum and what happens next.
Thanks for having us. Lots of fun.
Take care, everybody. Bye.